Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to today's Friday Reflections on this Friday, the 8th of May 2026. Today I'm going to continue my study of morality in the Quran by Muhammad Abdullah Draz, the Azari Shaykh from the past century. We're going to continue today on page 23 of the book, which is titled Responsibility. The notion of obligation gives rise to two corollaries, responsibility and sanction. They are respectively the support and foundation of obligation. To be obliged is to follow some level of responsibility, which must somehow be reinforced by appropriate sanction. To be responsible is to be obliged to answer for something, to be accountable to someone. This chapter considers the general characteristics of responsibility, as well as its conditions for moral and religious perspectives, and finally, its social dimension. 1. Analysis of the general idea of responsibility. Responsibility is characterized by both action and judgment. By exercising our judgment, the notion of responsibility legitimizes an action prior to its performance. Thus, the first step is to take something upon ourselves and then employ our capacities to realize it. The Quran alludes to the latent acceptance of responsibility by human beings. We offered the trust, the moral law, to the heavens, the earth, and the mountains, but they refused to bear it and shrank from it. But the human being bore it. Indeed, he, the human being, was unjust and ignorant. This is in Al-Azab, Surah 33, Ayah 72. This is only a latent aspect, an aptitude which hardly assumes responsibility in an action. The latter will only happen when certain conditions pertaining to age and health, for instance, have to be given to age. How do they do that? Subhanallah. The latter will only happen when certain conditions pertaining to age and health, for instance, have been realized, so that their promises and engagements are given moral significance. It is not even sufficient that these general conditions have been brought together for us to become effectively responsible. Concrete circumstances must also be added and invite us to insert our activity within the web of facts. It is true that we are never without such circumstances. All of us necessarily maintain some sort of connection, occupy a certain place, and exercise some function within society. Even when alone and isolated, we are responsible for the purity of our heart and righteousness of our thoughts, as well as the protection of our life and health. It may therefore be maintained that some degree of responsibility is attached to human life at every moment, which is not only virtual, but also real and present. As soon as the general conditions exist, the variety of situations occurring only serve to specify and define the object of this responsibility. We are naturally responsible before becoming or being made morally responsible. So the Shaykh here is highlighting that there are certain things that even if a human being is on their own, they are responsible for those things. We're responsible for our hearts, for our thoughts, for the protection of our life and our health. Can't be expecting anybody else to be responsible for those things. We are responsible for them. And so that's before we even get into moral responsibility. The Shaykh continues, when we intervene of our own initiative to accept, change, or modify a particular possibility, we become the authors of our choice. Responsibility becomes imputably. The first moment of responsibility thus inspires in us a feeling of power, This is a force. In the second, by contrast, we take on an attitude of humility and submission. This is a duty. Salam alaikum. This is a duty. The assumption of an obligatory act focuses our attention on two dimensions of responsibility. The first considers the completion of the act, and the second, its judgment. Judgment can proceed from within us, as when we impose obligations upon ourselves, or from outside. So when obligations are determined by society or by a higher authority that we have to be responsible for. This gives rise to three types of responsibility: purely moral, social, and religious. In this regard, the Quran states, believers, do not betray Allah and the Messenger, or knowingly betray others by committing an abuse of a trust. Surah An-Anfal, which is 8:27. The Quran presents religious responsibility as purely moral responsibility, since any responsibility enters the moral realm when it is accepted by our persons. The Quran often reminds people to honor their pledge of faith and all its associated commandments. In Quranic ethics, any responsibility, both personal and social, is subordinated to religious responsibility, i.e., must be divinely approved. All responsibilities emanating from personal initiative that do not violate the law must be honored. So that means anything which is a responsibility which is not haram, we must honor those things. If we've made a pledge to honor something, we must honor it because it's our word, it's our integrity. As Allah says in the Holy Quran, honor your contracts. Your contracts will be asked about. Surah Al-Isra 17:34. Responsibilities that may violate the law have to be abandoned. The Prophet said, whoever has vowed to perform a pious duty must do so, but whoever vows to commit a sin must abstain. So in other words, this is only applying to bad things. If you have pledged to do something which is obviously sinful or criminal or bad, you are allowed, in fact, you must not honor those things because that's sinful or criminal. But anything else, you must honor it. He also said, Muslims must always keep the provisions of their contracts. Thus, any stipulation not legitimated by God's book is null and void. But in a similar vein, any arrangement which aims to establish harmony between Muslims is valid as long as it does not prohibit something that God has allowed or allows something which God has prohibited. The same applies for our social responsibilities, where not even our closest blood relations excuse a believer from upholding justice. The Quran states, O you who believe, establish equity, witness for Allah, even if it is against yourselves, your parents, or your close relatives. Surah An-Nisa, which is Surah 4, Ayah 135. Again, the emphasis here that the Shaykh, and referring to the Quran, puts the emphasis on, is the only time that you must not honor your contracts or your pledges is if those things are unjust, that they are sinful or unjust. Only in that situation. If they are not sinful, if they are just, then you must honor them. And whoever they're with, whether they're with a Jewish person or a Christian person or an atheist, you must honor them because that's your word. If you've given your word that you're going to do something, and that's a good thing, you must do your level best to do it. Otherwise, that in itself is a sin. It follows that obedience to leaders and superiors is also subject to divine law. In cases of dispute, the Quran and Sunnah must be consulted. Any violations must be rejected. The Prophet clearly states, there is no obedience to the created when it means disobeying the Creator. When there is harmony among personal and social duties with Islamic rules, we become morally, socially, and religiously responsible subjects. Nevertheless, each realm retains its specificities and conditions. Moral responsibility is exercised immediately and in a permanent way. Social responsibility functions only intermittently, and religious responsibility only appears clearly on the day of judgment. Moreover, Islamic legislation does not place similar importance on the conditions which establish our moral and religious responsibility in comparison with social responsibility. General conditions of moral and religious responsibility in the Quran extend to all creatures endowed with reason. Thus we read, "There is no one in the heavens and the earth, but who will come to the All-Merciful as a servant." Surah Al-Maryam 1993. So by your Lord, we will question them all about what they used to do. Surah Al-Hijr 15:92 to 93. And most certainly, we will question those to whom the messengers were sent, and we will question the messengers. Surah Al-Araf, that's Surah 7, Ayah 6. On the day of judgment, we will be questioned concerning our moral responsibility. And notice, everyone there is accountable. Again, this is the sense of justice. Justice, which is a universal principle. Even the messengers, they will be questioned. And the people that the messengers were sent to will be questioned. Everyone is accountable. All acts will be revealed, whether hidden or manifest. Even our faculties will be questioned, bearing witness to how we employed them. Specifically, the Prophet said that everyone will be questioned regarding in what occupation he spent his life, for what motive he acted, and from what source he made his fortune, and how he used it, and how he used his own body. In other words, everyone will be questioned with regard to their trusts. In order to be universal, however, moral and religious responsibility express certain conditions that are detailed in the Quran. This is the subject of what follows. Conditions of moral and religious responsibility. A. The personal nature of responsibility. The personal characteristic of moral and religious responsibility is a fundamental principle in the Quran. In addition to innumerable other proofs, the following verses clearly make this point. For it, the soul is what it has earned against it and what it has acquired. Surah Al-Baqarah, 2286. And whoever accrues a bad deed, he only accrues it against his own soul. Surah Al-Nisa 4:111. Whoever is guided is only guided for his own soul, and whoever is misguided is only misguided to his detriment, and no soul will bear another's burden. Surah Al-Isra 17:15. Fear a day when no parent will be able to atone for their child, or a child for their parent. Surah Luqman 31:33. This day every soul will receive its desert for what it has earned. No justice will there be on this day, for Allah is swift in account. Surah Al-Mu'min 40:17. And for all are degrees in accordance with what each did. Surah Al-Kahf 46:19. And that is naught for man except what he strove for. Surah Al-Najm 53-39. So all of these verses, they make very clear about the personal nature of responsibility for each and every one of us. Every person is therefore responsible for his or her actions. No blame or praise can be reassigned to anyone else. Adam's sin in the Quran was due to an accidental weakness, an act of forgetfulness that resulted in a lapse of responsibility. His recognition for having sinned and demonstration of repentance was sufficient for his reinstatement among the ranks of the guided. Human nature is generally described as follows in the Quran. Surely we created man in the best form, then we reduced him to the lowest of the low, with the exception of those who believe and work righteousness. They will have a joyful remuneration. Surah Al-Tin 95, 4-6. Only the guilty party can redeem themselves in Islam. No innocent soul can be sacrificed in another's place. This is against divine justice, and indeed that of human sensibilities. Two exceptions appear to be made to individual responsibility in the Quran. In the first instance, we read, "They will bear their own burdens and other burdens together with their own." Surah Al-Ankabut 29-13. And in another, we are told that the children of the faithful will be treated equally to their ancestors, providing that they follow them in faith. The first exception is moderated as follows. There is never mention of total transfer of blame or praise. In fact, personal responsibility remains intact. It is only a supplementary act of blame or praise. As for the guilty, the Quran further stipulates that they were actively engaged in destructing and misguiding other people. Thus, they are responsible for the wrong that they willfully instigated. This does not exonerate those who follow them. The Quran presents this in the form of blame laying on the day of judgment, where the weak will blame the strong. Both parties will ultimately be held to account in accordance with their participation. Where there is no causality or mediation, each individual remains personally responsible. Thus, people are responsible for the consequences of their behavior through time and space, whether what they undertake is good or reprehensible. You know, someone said here on TikTok, "I am God, bow before me." No, you're missing the point. This whole thing here is about responsibility. Within Islam, it's understood as your personal responsibility. Now, even an ethical atheist would understand that we are responsible for our own actions. It's not about that we should bow before God. Yes, as Muslims do, but we do that as for ourselves, for our own good, actually. God doesn't need any of our prayers. But this is not about that. This is about how we live. And how we live has to be responsible. The Prophet had said, "Death ends all human actions, except in three cases: a continuous charity, valuable knowledge, or descent offspring." Thus, even after our death, or decent offspring, sorry, I think that's a spelling mistake. Thus, even after our death, the consequences of our intentional actions continue to accumulate in our balance of deeds, as confirmed by the Prophet. In conformity, any murder committed unjustly will be partly charged against its first perpetrator. In addition to responsibility for positive sin, individuals are also responsible for complacency towards bad conduct. Injustice and wrongdoing must be challenged and prevented by all open legal means and by employing all of our capabilities. People in ancient times were repeatedly admonished for not opposing the reprehensible behavior of those among them. And of course, that is a universal principle. One of the things, even in the political situation in the UK at the moment, is this issue keeps coming up. The issue of crime and not doing enough about it. The issue of corruption and not doing enough about it. And that this has to change. We must not confuse this with collective responsibility. Collectivity in Islam is the sum of individual consciences who are aware of the moral rule, what has violated it, but who allow criminals to thrive and continue unabated with their destructive practices. Those who make an effort to rectify the situation are redeemed. As for the second exception to personal responsibility, namely the future equality between believers and their offspring, the issue appears to be a misunderstanding of the Quranic verse. The text only alludes to a reunion between believers and their faithful offspring, and not as an overture of equality. It is solely a premise of uniting people with similar affinity to faith within this heavenly congregation. However, individuals will nevertheless be accorded their deserved station in keeping with their deeds. Finally, there is no contradiction with the concept of shafa'ah, or intercession of the angels and the prophets in favor of the just, with the permission of God. Intercession must satisfy three conditions: God's permission, God's approval of the subject of intercession, and only truth about the good deeds of the subject can be spoken in support of their salvation. Thus, our efforts, prayers, and future intercession, if we're permitted such a role, only serve to reveal what ought to be so in accordance with God and his laws. It is ultimately the truth of every individual that matters, and that can be accounted for. No intercession can introduce false support for any soul. Each soul will be judged according to its own merits. Our actions must be in conscious harmony with the law to attain praise. Such consciousness dwells in our hearts. As a result, we are not equipped to judge others as God will judge them. Very important point there. As such, we are not equipped to judge others as God will judge them. How many judgmental people do we come across today, even within our faith tradition, who go around judging everyone? This is not correct. Nor can we fully grasp how we ourselves will be held to account. However, this does not diminish from the necessity of our self-judgment. Not knowing the exact details does not change anything of the matter of individual responsibility and its unique basis for moral merit and all ensuring rewards. God's mercy encompasses all creation. It is a virtue of this that everyone has the moral and material means to understand the law and to obey it. There is a portion, however, reserved for those who piously observe their obligations. The Quran states, "The most dignified among you with Allah are the most heedful." I think I'll leave it there today on page 32 of the book, and we will return to this next Friday. The book I've been reading is Morality in the Quran, The Greater Good of Humanity by Shaykh Muhammad Abdullah Draz, who was an Azari Shaykh from the 20th century. I wish you all a very good evening. May Allah bless you all. And if you find these broadcasts useful, please do consider supporting my Buy Me a Coffee. And that will, when people sign up to that and subscribe, that helps me make these broadcasts sustainable. And it also will, as part of that, I'm planning to do a monthly Zoom meeting where I invite the subscribers of that to come into that Zoom meeting, and you can actually meet me and discuss with me in a much more direct way than we are doing here, and ask me whatever you want. So please consider signing up for that if that is of interest. And I wish you all a very good evening and have a wonderful weekend. I will be back here tomorrow live for my podcast with Ed Buckner from America, who was the former president of American Atheists, free thinker and intellectual from the United States of America. May Allah bless you all. Until next time. Assalamu alaikum, and peace be with you.